Hello, everyone, and welcome to Navigating the Challenges of Unconscious Bias. My name is Tony Ragunanan. I want to make this as practical as possible. In other words, to humanize the experience based on the challenges that are actually common in the workplace. This is not a training session on unconscious bias. It is an opportunity to define what unconscious bias is and to remind us to be aware of how it can impact us and the 5 ways to address it as we move forward. Unconscious bias radically influences how we make decisions by impacting our perception and reaction to others. For individuals, some forms of unconscious bias are difficult to override, even if they know that it is wrong, because they are deeply ingrained in our thinking. Studies have shown that we could at least make some shifts in our behavior. I want to give you a personal story. It's not work related, but years ago, I used to go to this plumber to buy plumbing supplies. But every time I go there, he would talk to me like if I am a plumber, using terminology I can't understand. These are challenges that we see every day. He has good intentions, but he is not aware of his unconscious challenge. And eventually, I simply stopped going. Now, I could have told him about it, but he didn't seem like the type of person who could receive some negative feedback. And I could have been wrong about that. And this is something we all have to be aware of. Sometimes we are not aware of the environment we create based on our own communication styles. And we will go into that in more detail. Patricia Devine, psychology professor and director of the Prejudice Lab, says that there are a lot of people who are very sincere in their renunciation of prejudice, yet they are vulnerable to habits of mind. Intentions are not good enough. So let's go into what is unconscious bias. Unconscious bias or implicit bias is often defined as prejudice or unsupported judgments in favor of or against one thing, person, or group as compared to another, in a way that is usually considered unfair. This is different from conscious bias or explicit bias, which is to be aware, intentional, and responsive. Every time you make a decision, your social background, life experiences, personal and cultural values influence your reasoning. And this develops through a variety of conditioning. The first one is classical conditioning. This is where something may have happened to you in the past. Maybe you have eaten something or had a bad experience with somebody. And when you re-experience it, you have this automatic reaction to that situation. Next is instrumental conditioning. If someone decides to reward you, you would do the work because of that reward. This is instrumental conditioning. And then there's social learning, where if you are in an environment where others are behaving in a certain way, you may eventually begin to behave that way. And this is how unconscious bias usually starts. There's a popular analogy where if you put a frog into boiling water, he will jump out immediately. However, if you put a frog in cold water and you start heating up the water gradually, the frog will eventually stay there and die. And this is what happens to many of us. It is so habitual for us to behave in certain ways, to approach people in certain ways, to create an environment that is unconscious around us. And this happens to many of us. And we may have problems that we don't know we have. If you have had a bad experience with someone in your life, or you have been having a bad experience with someone in your life, and you are not doing anything about it, the problem keeps getting worse and worse. And this is something that we have to address. The idea is to get out of the pot. Sometimes you don't know that you have the problem. So this is what we will talk about. How bias affects our decision making and behavior. There's something called a ladder of inference. This is where you have a pool of available data and you select data from that pool. You make assumptions based on the data you have selected and you draw conclusions from that. And then you develop certain beliefs and take action based on those beliefs. There's a reflexive loop. Our beliefs affect what data we select the next time. When we choose data a second time, or third time, or fourth time, sometimes we choose data that really represents our beliefs. Imagine this. You bought an older home and began to remodel one of the rooms. However, you noted that one window, which measured 2 feet horizontally by 2 feet vertically, let in an inadequate amount of light. Seeking a resolution to this problem, you took your saw and made the opening larger. With pride, you surveyed your work, noting that a significantly increased amount of sunlight now poured through to brighten the room. However, when you again measured the dimensions of the window, you found that it still measured 2 feet by 2 feet. How do you explain such a phenomenon? For many people, this is a bit confusing because people go to the square window. I never said it was a square window. It can actually be a circular window or kite-shaped window or many other shapes that may fit inside of a square or even inside of a circle. Many people with this problem, they make the assumption that it is a square window. there are many blocks to creativity. Making assumptions, over reliance on logic, analytical rules, and fear of failure creates thinking boundaries. If you look at this picture, many of you will notice that there are two squirrels on a tree. But if you take a closer look, or if you look at it from a distance, or take a picture with your phone, you will see that it is actually a woman's face. Look at this one. If I ask you how many trees were here, typically people will look at the roots and say 5 trees. But the man is chopping a tree that has no top. And the bird is pecking at a tree that has no base. So it's unreliable information. Therefore, we shouldn't share this information. Famous artist Salvador Dali created this sculpture, which was eventually turned into a painting. If you look at this painting, you could see negative body language. If I ask you, what do you think he was thinking? What he was thinking here is that we store information. In order to find out what is in those compartments, we really have to develop good relationships that are based on trust. And lastly, what do you see here? It's just a lion. We shouldn't be jumping to any conclusions. We tend to seek out patterns. Unconscious bias occurs because of the brain's natural tendency to look for patterns and associations in the world. When we think that something is true, we look for anything that will confirm it to us. Eventually, we fall prey to seeing things that are not there. We like to take shortcuts. It is our tendency to try to simplify the world. Carl Jung once said, "Thinking is difficult. That's why most people judge." Let's look at this problem.